Hi, everybody, and welcome to part two of the insect update for the 2021 cotton focus. If you viewed the other video already, you've learned about thrips control. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about plant bug management. My name's Scott Stewart. I'm the Center Director at the West Tennessee Research and Education Center, but I'm also an extension entomologist in my previous life. So I'm going to be giving this update. Probably next year, we'll have somebody else in this position that will be talking with you. So let me share my screen real quickly and we'll get started. All right, here we go. So that's a picture of the tarnished plant bug on the right. As I already said, we've already discussed thrips and we're moving down the list and we're going to talk about tarnished plant bugs or plant bugs in general. And the reason I say plant bugs is we often are dealing with other species in our geography, particularly the clouded plant bugs. So I just tend to group them as plant bugs. Now, normally in a presentation, I'd never dream of showing a slide like this, but because this is a video presentation and you can pause and read it at your leisure, I thought I'd put up our thresholds for treating or when we recommend to treat for tarnished plant bug. And I really just put this up here to make the point that these are very well researched thresholds. We've done this research collectively over a number of years in the Mid-South some time ago, and I think they're very valid. And I really want people to have confidence in our threshold. And the first thing you need to know is what they are. So during the first 2 weeks of squaring, we'd primarily recommend sampling using a sweep net. And we have a little bit more of an aggressive threshold of treating if we find 8 or more tarnished plant bugs per 100 sweeps. The reason it's a little bit more aggressive is at that time you don't have a very big square population. So it doesn't take a lot of plant bugs to knock your square retention back. Now, anytime prior to bloom, we'd recommend reducing our treatment thresholds if your square retention is dropping too severely. So anytime you start getting in that 80–85% square retention range, I would not tell you to totally disregard these thresholds on this screen, but I would consider reducing those thresholds or cutting them back maybe 30, 40, even 50%, depending on what your square retention is. If you have very, very poor square retention, you almost need to get on a scheduled spray and try to build that square population back up. Now, once we hit the 3rd week of squaring, we relax that treatment threshold normally to about 15 tarnished plant bugs per 100 sweeps. And again, at this time, we have a much bigger square population. So it takes more plant bugs to knock a high percentage of your squares off. And we really would, at this time, prefer using a sweep net. And that works pretty well because still till this time, we're normally dealing with adults. Once we get to first bloom, and especially the 2nd week of bloom, we would normally suggest that you switch sampling methods to a drop cloth. The drop cloth works better on immatures, which is the primary culprit and the biggest portion of the population, typically once we get into bloom. And we'd recommend treating when plant bugs number 3 or more on a drop cloth. The black drop cloth is what we prefer. If you'd like to use a sweep net, you can still use that threshold of 15 or more per 100 sweeps. Now, once we get into bloom, I start giving people some little cheats. One is for clouded plant bugs. I tell people to count them as equivalent as 1.5 tarnished plant bugs. And that's because on a per bug basis, they do a little bit more damage. They're a bigger bug, but they're also more likely to feed on bolls, which is worse than feeding on squares. And I'd also tell people to count stink bugs, which are almost exclusively boll feeders or seed feeders, to count them as 3 tarnished plant bugs. Those are good cheats when you're dealing with a complex of plant bugs and stink bugs, which we often are doing in Tennessee. So I'm going to show you the results of an insecticide efficacy trial. This is what we call a regional efficacy trial. A version of this test has been done for many years in a row, typically with the more or less the same ingredients that you see represented here on the screen. So really what I'm showing you here is just the total number of plant bugs that were found across 3 rating dates in this insecticide trial. During that time, we made 2 insecticide applications based on our treatment thresholds. Just to set this up a little bit, this cotton is managed up until about first bloom with insecticides as needed, and then we let it go for about 7 to 10 days. And when we do that, we start to see this buildup, rapid buildup of tarnished plant bugs well exceeding treatment threshold. So this is a good environment to test the efficacy of these different insecticides. Now, if you look at the real results of this test this year, it's very much like what I've seen in my test in past years, as well as what we've seen in other tests across the Mid-South. Namely, that the top 3 insecticides that we typically see in terms of reducing tarnished plant bugs numbers is diamond, orthene, and transform. Now, in this case, we also had orthene at that 3/4 pound rate plus brigade in this test, and it did essentially the same as orthene, or maybe a little bit better. What also has been consistent in these trials is we have some poor performers. Alias, which is an imidacloprid product, did very poorly. Carbine doesn't do very well. Centric used to be better, but we're starting to see some indications of resistance to these neonics, and it's showing up in our Centric ratings. And then we have kind of what I'd call second tier, mid-tier products that I think still have some utility, but they're just not as good as orthene, diamond, or transform at reducing plant bugs, namely Bidrin, but also Vidate. So I want to show the yield this year of this test to make a couple of points. The first point is yield doesn't always track plant bug control directly. We see it often, but this year we didn't see a perfect correlation between yield and the level of plant bug control. And part of that has to do with other pests that are in the system. This year we had actually lighter populations of tarnished plant bug than we've seen previously. We weren't spraying as much. We also had more stink bugs showing up in our trial. So because some of these insecticides are better on plant bugs but worse on stink bugs, we start to see some differences. First thing I'll point out is our lowest yielding treatment was either plots that weren't treated with insecticide or those treated with that imidacloprid product or carbine. They really provided no yield protection, even though they did reduce tarnished plant bug numbers. The next lowest yielding plots, actually the next group of plots, all yielded statistically the same. Towards the top, we see orthene plus brigade, and Bidrin, followed by transform. And I'm not too surprised, and again, there's not a statistical difference between these, but because we had stink bugs, I would expect products that control both tarnished plant bugs and stink bugs, that combination, the best, might rise towards the top, and that's exactly what would happen. Transform very often would be at the top of this list if you didn't have stink bugs, so would diamond. And that leads me into my next point, which is this is a test looking at insecticide efficacy of individual products. It was sprayed twice with the same product, essentially back to back in about a 1-week interval. That's not normally what I'd recommend. I would recommend mixing or alternating your insecticide to match your pest population. The final point I'll make before I go to this slide is 2 insecticide applications made about a 500 or 600 pound difference in seed cotton. Very typical of what we've seen in the past with this particular insecticide trial. So you're talking about a 200 pound lid increase. But keep in mind, we already managed plant bugs up to a certain point in this season. And then after we quit treating this trial, we made no other insecticide applications, even though they were likely necessary to maintain insect control. But we did that so we could see the impact of these particular treatments. If you mess up and do a really poor job at managing plant bugs, it can be much worse. And this is an example of that. This is a separate trial we had this year at the Jackson Center where we're located. The real take-home point from this test is that if we had a season-long approach for controlling plant bugs, which most of these treatments did, we saw substantial yield increases, well above that 400, 500, 600 pounds of seed cotton yield. And in fact, in this test, we saw on average about a 1,250 pound increase in seed cotton yield by managing plant bugs and stink bugs and the whole pest complex throughout the season versus not doing anything at all like you see on this left bar. Now, in this particular test, we're evaluating an experimental insecticide that was treated at different timings, like first square, first bloom. And then the other treatments were made at my discretion based on our treatment thresholds and using the chemistries that I thought best fit. So it might be a tank mix, it might be just a solo application, and it varied for each treatment. Regardless, again, the take-home point is we need to do a good job of managing tarnished plant bugs or we're leaving potentially a bale of cotton on the ground. And on average, I'd say most of our guys are doing a good job. This slide is just to make the point that when you run into plant bugs in fairly high pressure, you got to make good decisions. So I'm going to end up, like I did with thrips control, talking about this new BT technology under development by Bayer. Its trade name is Thrive-On. It's excellent at reducing thrips injury. In fact, I'd call it a standalone treatment that's essentially a walk-away treatment. Now, don't quote me on that, but that's what our experience would say. We'll learn more about this technology as it becomes introduced into the market. This year, the plans are for just some large-scale testing. Some growers and consultants will have this in maybe 30, 40, 60 acre plots to evaluate. And then in 2022, we'd expect full release and introduction into the marketplace. This is a picture of a test we had in Milan. I showed it on the previous graph right here. And if you look real close, it's not outlined, but these plots that look a little bit more vigorous, that's the Thrive-On technology. And the vigor that you're seeing there is because it's providing substantial thrips control. On this slide, I want to talk a little bit about what it's bringing for plant bug management, specifically tarnished plant bug management. What we've seen over the years is this technology is delaying and reducing the buildup of tarnished plant bugs. They don't get the populations in this Thrive-On technology, this Thrive-On cotton don't build as quickly or get quite as high. And because of that, we're not having to make as many insecticide applications. So in this particular test, we were actually evaluating this technology versus cotton that had the same technology without the Thrive-On trait, and trying to see what difference it made in terms of the number of insecticide applications that were needed and how it affected yield. And you see a couple of notes up on top. The first thing I'll point out is that we had to make 2 insecticide applications in the Thrive-On technology for plant bugs or plant bugs in a combination of stink bugs. Whereas where we didn't have that Thrive-On technology, we had to make 4 insecticide applications. 1 application for thrips control, which was not necessary in the Thrive-On technology, and 3 total applications for tarnished plant bugs, and again, with a few stink bugs in there. So in this particular case, we actually saved 2 insecticide applications, 1 for thrips and 1 for tarnished plant bugs. I think that's going to be pretty typical of what we see when this technology is introduced, but we don't really know yet. So it's going to take a little bit more experience. Now, I did want to mention the yield in this technology. Up there on the right, you can see that the Thrive-On technology, where we managed it according to our thresholds, yielded about 2,500 pounds of seed cotton. It's not great yields, but this was a really challenging yield environment for this cotton this year. But that's still about 1,000 pounds of cotton. A little bit less than that, but not significantly less, was the unsprayed Thrive-On technology. It wasn't sprayed for plant bugs. We very often have seen that we see a yield reduction when we don't spray the Thrive-On technology. This would be consistent with that. One thing we know for sure is we are going to have to manage and treat for tarnished plant bugs in the Thrive-On technology. It's just going to be a little less, probably 1 spray a year less on average. We'll have to see how it goes. The good news is it looks like our current thresholds work very well. If you just follow those thresholds, you'll realize that insecticide savings. Now, the next 2 lines, you'll see that the non-BT cotton, the non-Thrive-On cotton, didn't yield as well. And most of that is because of the damage that thrips caused, not the damage that plant bugs caused. But that certainly was a component of it. So again, in a totally unsprayed environment, there was a substantial yield increase of the Thrive-On technology. And there was also a significant yield increase by managing with insecticides the pests that were in the Thrive-On technology. It just wasn't as big of an increase, if that makes any sense to you. So a few take-home points on plant bug management. First, our treatment thresholds work. You need to follow them. We've got a lot of good data. And there's some other things you can do to help yourself. One thing we try to recommend people do when possible is kind of block their cotton fields into an area. And that's honestly to keep them away from corn. We have experiences that if we have cotton near corn, there tends to be more plant bugs in that cotton. So you can try to avoid that corn cotton effect by blocking your cotton fields together. Planting early is always recommended, as early as practical. And for Tennessee, I think it's really important to use early and mid-maturing varieties. Very likely going to have to make an additional insecticide application if you're growing more full season varieties. Another take-home point is that plant bugs are annoying, but they are manageable. The Thrive-On technology is going to make them a little less annoying, but we are still going to have to manage those plant bugs in that technology. The final take home is you can't forget to account for stink bugs and other pests. This is something I consistently see in my test when we yield them. I'm a big fan of mixing or rotating these real take home insecticide products that are take home really top shelf insecticide products that we have for managing plant bugs. I like mixing things like orthene, diamond, transform, bidrin together very often, and I can adjust the rates accordingly. I think the neonicotinoids like the imidacloprid, Centric still have a place, but it's during the early squaring window. They don't really fit in the flowering window at all. With that, give you a final plug like I did in my first presentation. Don't forget we have some excellent resources up there, utcrops.com, the UT News blog, the UT Variety Data website, and also the UT Pest Guide site, which gives a lot of our thresholds and insecticide recommendations really for all the crops, including cotton. All these sites are integrated. You can go back and forth essentially seamlessly by going to any one of them. So please take advantage of that information for you. And with that, I really appreciate everybody's paying attention. And we'll have one more video to go through talking about bollworm management.